Two paddles, one square, no story, no graphics, no music, and yet somehow this became the foundation of a multi-billion-dollar industry. More than 50 years later, the question is Pong actually still fun to play today, or are we just respecting it because of its history? Today we are reviewing Pong. When Pong was released in 1972, it didn't just become successful, it basically kickstarted the entire arcade gaming industry. In doing so, its formula was actually incredibly simple. There is just two paddles and one ball, and the first player to miss loses the point, and that's it. There are no upgrade systems, no progression systems, no open world, no battle pass, none of the things that the modern gaming industry tries to tell us that we desperately need, or maybe even want. And yet, people just kept playing it. Now, why is that? The biggest strength of Pong is also the reason it survived for over half a century. It is immediately understandable. You don't need a tutorial, you don't need prior gaming experience, you just load it up and start playing. And because matches are short and competitive, Pong is actually surprisingly addictive, especially against another human player. One match turns into five, and five turns into an entire evening full of fun, especially if that then turns into a spontaneous tournament to see who's the best player. Against the AI, the experience is decent, but against friends, that's where Pong actually shines. And to be honest, this is the more fun way, but whichever way you play it, Pong earns 8 points out of 10 for fun. The gameplay is obviously inspired by table tennis or ping pong, and just like real ping pong, the mechanics are extremely simple. You move the paddle, you hit the ball, and you try not to fail. That simplicity can either be a strength or a limitation. There's almost no mechanical depth, especially compared to more modern titles, but what is there works flawlessly. Controls are responsive, feedback is immediate, and depending on the version you play, the game still feels surprisingly smooth, but because of the lack of depth, it cannot really score higher here than 5 points out of 10. We can keep this fairly short. There is no story. Except, of course, when you create your own emotionally heated rivalry with the person sitting next to you, but sadly that doesn't account for storytelling, so I am very sorry, but no points out of 10. Visually, Pong is about as basic as video games can possibly get. Everything you see throughout the game is a black background, two white paddles, a white square dot representing the ball, and a dotted center line, and that's it. You only really get the score at the top of the screen, and that's all you get. That was enough in 1972, and it got the job done, even back in the day it wasn't exactly stunning. At the same time, there is a weirdly charming aspect about that minimalist approach, but that also means it can't score higher than 2 points out of 10 for graphics. The sound design actually follows the exact same philosophy. There is no music, no voice acting, no ambient soundscape. The only thing you really get is little electronic beeps when the ball hits one of the paddles, and that's it. The rest is just silence. And honestly, that is at least recognizable. If you want, you could call it iconic, but there is very little design here. There's only so much enjoyment you can get from repetitive arcade sound effects, and so I don't really want to go higher here than 4 points out of 10. At first glance, Pong looks like the kind of game you try once and then never touch again, especially today. But weirdly enough, the opposite is true. Its simplicity makes it endlessly replayable in short sessions. You lose a point and immediately want a rematch. You win a game and you want to prove it wasn't luck. And especially when you are playing with friends and that session turns into a bit of a tournament, that competitive loop still works decades later, which is why replay value scores 8 points out of 10. Reviewing the level design of Pong feels a bit like reviewing the design of a football field. It's functional, and that's really all it needs to be. but that clean arena keeps the focus entirely on the competition that is being played. And while that is charming, the lack of progression or environmental variety also makes it feel repetitive after a rather short while. So, functional as it may be, and because it is functional, we do want to be generous here, it can only score 5 points out of 10. One thing that is genuinely impressive about Pong is how stable it has always been. Now, it was originally played on dedicated arcade machines that were specifically designed to play this one game, and I couldn't find reports of those machines crashing or otherwise having technical issues. The version I played was a browser port of the game, and even that ran flawlessly, so from all I could experience myself and research, every version there is out there is polished to the point that you basically will never encounter any issues. So basically, I have to give a full score here, 10 points out of 10 for stability. Now this is where Pong becomes almost untouchable. Without it, the gaming industry would, at the very least, look completely different today, and at worst would possibly not even exist. It was one of the first arcade games to achieve massive, and I do mean massive, commercial success, and helped prove that video games could become mainstream entertainment. So even if you don't personally enjoy playing Pong, which is fair, its importance is impossible to deny, which is why it receives once again a full score, 10 points out of 10 for history. As I said in my review for the Oregon Trail, many games from these early days of video gaming do suffer from a serious lack of customizability. Even the version I play allowed me to switch between multiplayer and single player, to turn sound on or off, and sometimes even choose between different control methods, so in my case choose between mouse and keyboard. Modern adaptations occasionally add visual themes or gameplay modifiers, but the core experience remains almost unchanged and unchangeable, which is okay. It's enough for this type of game, and of course it also means the score cannot really go higher than 5 out of 10. So is Pong actually still worth playing in 2026? If you expect a deep single-player experience that will keep you hooked for hours on end with progression systems and storytelling and cinematic presentation, then no, obviously it's not. But that's also not what it's trying to be. Pong succeeds because it strips gaming down to its bare essentials, because back in the day, more than 50 years ago, that's all they could afford. There is competition, there is reaction, there is simplicity, and somehow that still works even more than 50 years later. And with its final score of 57 out of 100, not only does it outscore the Oregon Trail, the first game we reviewed, but that score will also never go down, because any aging that this game has been through has already happened. Because it strips itself down to the fundamentals, what still remains today will always be there. And honestly, for a game that is probably older than most of the people watching this video, that is genuinely impressive. If you've enjoyed this review, make sure to like the video and subscribe to catch more retro and backlog reviews. And let me know in the comments, what is the oldest game that you genuinely still enjoy playing today? I'd wager that we are going to be covering most, if not all, of the games you're going to be suggesting in the next coming videos. So stay tuned for those, and I will see you in the next one.